It is now my privilege to introduce Mr. Doug Stroh. Doug is an agricultural consultant with Meyer Norris Penny and Lethbridge. He specializes in working with mixed grain operations throughout Western Canada. Doug provides services in business planning, farm management, financial and tax planning, succession, and cost production analysis. He has also been involved in feasibility studies focused on value-added opportunities for the primary producer. Doug receives his Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Alberta in 1983. He then earned his Chartered Accountant designation in 1988. Doug has been involved in Farm Credit Canada's Agri-Success Program and is a former member of the National Board of the Canadian Diabetes Association and is currently on the board of the Governors of Lethbridge College. Doug is married with 4 children and 2 grandchildren. When I asked if he had any hobbies, he said, and I quote, "I never get enough golf." It just so happens that we have some excellent golf balls and some nice golf shirts on our silent auction tonight. So please give a warm welcome to Mr. Doug Stroh.
What I'm going to talk about today is I am going to talk a little bit about how to run your business like a business. Yes, it is a farm, but it is also a business. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today when I'm talking. But in order to understand the business of farming, one of the things that we like to talk about is what we refer to as the 3-circle model. And really that is a model that's been developed that really helps put some perspective around the family dynamics that are involved when you're talking a family farm. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to give you 10 characteristics of what you'll find in a successful family business. Not necessarily farms, but just family business in general. No magic to the 10. It's just that if you want to keep score, you can rate yourself from 1 to 10 on each of the characteristics, and then you know you've got a score out of 100. So that's the accountant keeping it simple for you guys. And then time permitting, I know I'm between you guys and lunch. So time permitting, we'll talk a little bit about effective meetings. Because when I was talking with Ken earlier, one of the things that he really thought would be interesting is to how to incorporate effective business meetings into a farm business. Because a lot of farmers don't really do a good job of that. So I don't know how many in the room have seen this picture, but this is the theory of family business. Typically, there's 3 lovely concentric circles, one being the individual, which is also referred to often as the ownership circle, another one being the family, and the third one, of course, being the actual business of farming. And they're 3 lovely concentric circles, and every once in a while, they cross over a little bit, and yes, they create some challenges, but really what it's talking about is it creates some choices that have to be made. So when you're dealing with a family, individual, and a business, all in one wrapped up package that is a family farm, sometimes choices have to be made and you have to compromise in one of the different areas. One of the things that we stress when we're talking about the 3-circle model is when you're making decisions, when you're talking about challenges you have in your operation, know what circle you're playing in. So is it about family values? Is it about issues related to the family and the dynamics of the family? Is it about ownership? Is it about wealth? Is it about maintaining the capital that we've got? Or is it about just driving the business forward? So know what circle you're playing in when you're trying to make decisions. Now we move to the family farm. And really, probably argue that those circles being family and business, instead of just kind of crossing over a little bit, probably cross over more in a family farm. And that's because not only do you have family members that are involved in working directly in the business, but you also have family members that may not be involved in the family farm at all because they've moved on and they're doing other things, but they still have that connection to the farm. They still have that connection to the history and the legacy that is the family farm. And so those circles tend to draw closer together when you're dealing with issues, and you have to be cognizant of that when you're talking about business decisions and how they may be perceived by the family. So family businesses actually create some challenges, but I think they create some great opportunities. They are absolutely unique in terms of business. So when you're looking at the three circles, as I mentioned, know what arena you're playing in, whether it's one, two, or maybe it's all three circles are affected by a decision, but know what factors you need to consider when you're making decisions. And more importantly, celebrate the difference. This is what makes family business unique. So celebrate that. Don't see it as a burden, see it as an opportunity. In the family circle, one of the things you need to do or focus on is really building up family member self-esteem. It's pretty easy to say, my brother, really? No, he hasn't got a clue as to what he's doing. Not quite sure why Dad has him involved in the farm. Really? Yeah, he's family, but that's the worst thing you can be doing if you're trying to run a successful family farm. Anybody can learn, and family is family, and so you have to find a way to build up people's self-esteem, move them forward, and recognize those opportunities. Promote shared values. We are creatures of our environment. Our values that we develop as we grow up typically come from the environment that we are surrounded by. So when you're dealing with family businesses, a lot of the values that the individuals and family members have that are going to be working in the business or even outside of the business, a lot of those values are going to be very similar. So you've got an excellent opportunity and an advantage really over other businesses where you've got much more different varying values coming to the table. So you've got to celebrate those, recognize those shared values, and use them to your advantage. And then finally, in the family circle, one of the challenges that you really have to overcome is how to treat all family members fairly and equitably. That doesn't mean equal, but you have to be fair. Then you take the individual, so looking at yourself, looking inward. As an individual and possibly as an owner or future owner of the family farm, it's your job to be the steward of that farm. You got to figure out, while you're doing that, how to provide and maintain for your own long-term personal stability. You got to worry about your family that might be coming down the road or already exists. What about the next generation? You got to figure out how to preserve the value that you've generated for the family business. Are you going to reinvest it back into the business? Are you going to take that and separate it out and invest outside of the business in other interests or in other ways in terms of growing? And how do you do that? And do you want to be different and manage that differently than your brother or your sister or other siblings that may be involved in the farm? And if you're doing that, how do you manage that process and still keep the business viable and keep the investment in there growing? So a lot of challenges when you look at that circle in terms of you start thinking about the differences that you'll find amongst the individuals in the business. And finally, there is actually the business of farming. This one's the moneymaker. If you don't get this one right, you really got problems in the other two circles. You have to maintain a good, positive work environment. It's not just about the individual, it's about farming now is much larger, much more complex than it ever was. So it may not even be just about family members. Often now we see a lot of non-family members involved in the farm. You have to provide a good, safe working environment for those members involved in the farm as well. Farming is becoming big business. And with that, of course, gee, there's a little bit of risk. The key to the business side of things really is about finding the right balance so that you can maintain the viability of that operation into the future. Sounds pretty simple. So, keeping those in mind, I'm going to outline what we see in terms of family farms and healthy family farms, some of the characteristics that we see. And as I said, there's no magic to the 10, just easy to keep score if you want to. First one, you need to have a clear sense of purpose and values. Really what that's talking about is you need to have a mission and a vision of what you see the farm being somewhere down the road, whether that be 10, 15, 20 years down the road. What does that picture look like? And that picture has to align with the values of the family. That's what sets your family farm apart from the one down the road. Not all farms are alike. They are all different. So what's that picture look like? If you've got that picture in your mind, that's a start. Write it down, capture it. We see a lot of businesses, family businesses, they've gone through that exercise, they've created a lovely vision for the future. And then when we ask them about it, well, I think it's on a shelf somewhere. I think I can probably knock the dust off of it and pull it out. It's a living, breathing document. It sets the boundaries for all of the decisions and all the processes you need to incorporate. So this one is critical. This next one is really tough. We are all great communicators. Human nature. But I would challenge you, if you've ever had the statement, "That's not what I meant," then you've got room to improve in terms of your communication skills. More importantly, the environment that you create in the family farm is about creating open communication where there is no fear of retribution. I can have a different opinion and I can voice that, and I don't need to worry about somebody else looking at me, rolling their eyes, thinking, what is he talking about? Now, if you take the dynamics of just those working in the business, probably don't have a lot of variance in terms of thoughts and ideas. You start bringing in the family dynamic and maybe some of those family members that are outside of the business but still feel that they have a voice in terms of the long-term vision for the farm. Now the opinions are going to start to vary. You're going to see differences in opinion. You have to have an environment that allow for people to have different opinions and be comfortable in voicing them. Now, this isn't talking about the apple farmer. This really is one of the dynamics about family farms that people struggle with. Well, they're family. I'm sure they're wired and they think the same way I do because it's family. We're all the same. I phoned my mom at home and I laughed because I come from a family of 9 kids, 6 boys. Mom's not sure which boy it is that's talking to her on the phone until we talk for a while because we all sound the same. But we're all different. So with families, we have to remember that. There are differences. And as those differences become clearer, you need to find a way to manage them. And where you really see the differences is as the farm starts to expand and you get multiple generations, you get siblings that have kids of different ages involved in different things, the interests change, all of a sudden the dynamics get a lot more tough to manage and you're juggling a whole lot more differences. So it's a case of accepting those differences, recognizing them, and having again, remember having a plan as to how you manage those differences in terms of moving the business forward. Just as we're all different, we all grow and develop at different stages, at different speeds. We have different likes, dislikes. And what happens typically in a family farm, again, one of the things that we see is somebody will get pigeonholed into a role. Well, that's what they're good at, so that's what we decided you're going to be doing, and get used to it. Allow for growth. Allow for the opportunity for people to change and grow. As a professional, I can tell you that over the 20 some odd years that I've been a CA, my roles and responsibilities have changed dramatically. Yeah, there's a lot of similar things that I do, but I've been able to grow and develop and learn new skills and apply those in my business. You have to allow for that in the farm business as well. This should be an easy one. After all, it's a family business. But mistakes happen, and trust is actually something that is earned. And when you relate it into the business world, it gets much harder when you're talking a family farm, because those that are working in the business and you interact with on a day-to-day basis, it's easy to earn that trust and grow that trust and maintain it on a day-to-day basis. Now you take the family dynamic and you look at those family members outside of the business that may still have an interest in the farm. And I'm talking not just because they love the land and that's where mom and dad grew up and that's the home, but they might actually still be part owners in the farming business. So it might not just be, they may not just be hands-on. How do they trust that you're looking after everything that you need to? And how do you trust that they are actually contributing and providing the input you need to move the farm forward? What tools, what processes do you have to continue to earn that respect and that trust on a day-to-day basis? It's something you have to work on. It's not something that just happens. One of the ways to earn trust and to help is to actually have roles and responsibilities. That's a quote from my dad. I never got to drive the combine. I always got to drive the truck. I was okay with that. I didn't want to screw up the combine, plug it up, and all of a sudden have all kinds of problems. I was quite happy driving the truck, running back and forth, filling up the bins. I was busy, life was good. So you really do need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And more importantly with this one, is you need to find the roles and responsibilities that people are passionate about. Don't go pigeonholing somebody into something that they really don't want to do. And again, going back to the differences that we talked about a little earlier, a few slides earlier, everybody's different. So what are those differences? How do they fit into the roles and responsibilities that you need to incorporate into the farm? So maybe you've got somebody that really loves research and marketing, that aspect. Well, if that's a good fit, let them run with that. Define the role. Make sure they understand what they need to do. Let them run with it. Maybe there's somebody else that's much more detail-oriented in terms of field operations. That's who you want to have doing that. Maybe there's somebody that likes numbers. Well, they get to talk to the accountant. And it doesn't have to be the same person doing all of them. What we're finding nowadays, the farms are larger. It's impossible for one person to manage all of those. So develop the roles, develop the responsibilities, remembering the overall vision and where you want to go, and allow for people to grow into those roles and expand. That's the key. With roles and responsibilities comes accountability. This is another one that's a little tough when you're talking family. How do you tell your brother or your sister or your brother's son that he's doing a really lousy job? He's not holding up his end of the bargain. You need to have a process to do that. You need to have regular evaluations. You need to figure out how to get them back on track. You need to hold everybody in the business accountable. So you need regular evaluation, and you need a process to manage that, and you need to provide the resources and the training to help people understand their roles and be able to succeed. And then there needs to be balance. What's the saying from the movie? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. You need to have balance. And if I was to ask everybody in the room here what their definition of balance was in their farming operation, we'd probably get as many differing degrees and opinions as there are people in the room. And that's where balance becomes a challenge. Because your definition of balance might be different than somebody else's definition in the business. So how do you manage those differences and still be able to move the operations forward? I'm going to talk about this one a little bit further, or one of the tools that we use, of course, being effective meetings. But you really do need to have some kind of process for having regular discussions. And no, it is not the conversation around the dinner table or the breakfast table. And yeah, those are important. Those are good. But you need much more than that if you want to be moving the business forward. This is one that I actually do see a lot of progress when we're talking with family businesses and family farms. Recognizing as you get larger and more complex, you really do need to have a process in terms of having discussions and having them focused. And as I said, I'll talk a little bit more about this one in a bit here. And finally, you need to have outside perspective. Farming truly is a global business. It's way more complex than it used to be. And it's going to continue to get more complex as we move forward. You can't possibly know everything there is to know about farming. So identify those weaknesses in your operation. Know where you need to go to look for additional resources and support, and go fill that void. The example I like to use here is in the world of marketing. So you might do a lot of work, you might do a lot of research in terms of marketing. It's not going to the corner coffee shop and asking your buddies around the coffee table what they've been selling their canola crop for, or whether they should be pricing their canola, or whether you should be pricing it today. It's a great conversation in the coffee shop, but realistically, you need to go where there's professional, well-trained information that you can rely on. Now that might be a marketing group. It might be a marketing group of your peers. There might be groups of you that get together and say, okay, I can't possibly research all of the different varieties of crops or production that I do, so I need some help. Pull in those resources. It might be somebody that actually does research and puts out a publication. If you're comfortable with the knowledge and their approach to it, and if it fits your farming operation, that might be a solution to it. So there isn't one size fits all, but you need to find the right fit for your operation. An outside perspective, again, sometimes with the family farm, we get too focused on the farm itself and the business, and it's nice to have that outside perspective, somebody on the outside looking in and saying, have you thought about this? So that's really what it's about. That's the 10. I'm not going to ask how you scored. And quite honestly, if you were keeping score, how you scored is very important for your operation, not so much how you scored compared to your neighbor. Because again, it's about your operation, where you think you are, what you need to focus on, and where you need to go. So it's not about saying, well, I got 67 out of 100. How did you do? Really doesn't matter. The one thing I would say, though, when you're looking at these 10 characteristics, you can't look at one in isolation of the other 9. They're all important. You need to focus on all of them if you want to have a successful farm business. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the one called regular discussions, and really, more specifically, effective meetings. And whether it be on your farm or organizations you're involved in, we've all been in meetings where you come out of it and you go, wow, that was interesting. And I came to this meeting, why? So if you think about those, what were the reasons why those meetings didn't seem to be effective to you? There's a resource book that I really enjoy related to effective meetings. And it's a book called Death by Meeting. It's put out by Patrick Lencioni. And I really like it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a real easy read. It's a fable. So it's really just telling a story about a business in a fable format, and it highlights some of the challenges that you encounter in having effective meetings and communicating really within a business. And then the other part I really like about his approach is he doesn't make it real complicated. Really, he waters it down to 2 issues. So if you're struggling with effective meetings, it's probably because of a lack of drama, which is really speaking to a lack of conflict, debate, interaction in those meetings. Or it's probably a lack of structure. And it's a matter of trying to fit too many things into one standard meeting approach. How many times have you had a meeting where you get everybody together and you say, okay, we got a couple of things we need to talk about. And then you're done with those couple of things. Oh, and while we're here, define the agenda, stick to the agenda, and separate out the types of meetings so that you're actually effective and running those meetings. What you'll find is people will be far more engaged in that process. So those are the 2 primary issues, like I said again, as he waters them down. So it sounds pretty simple. So when I'm talking lack of drama, part of the problem might be in terms of the preparation. If you're not prepared to come into the meeting, you're probably not going to be as engaged as you need to be. You're not going to be able to participate in the discussion. You might not have had an opportunity to form any opinions yet. If you're not prepared, it's not going to be an effective meeting. And even if there's only one of you not prepared that's at that meeting, it's not going to be as effective a meeting as it otherwise should be. So everybody has to be able to come prepared. And when we talked about the differences earlier, in terms of people and differences, we're not all wired the same. Some of us make decisions different ways. There's people that need the information well in advance. They need to read it over 2 or 3 times. They need to absorb that information, and then they can form an opinion. Others may just need to get the information and they go, great, okay, I got a lot of questions. I need to talk them out in the meeting. So you have to prepare in your own way to be able to participate in the meeting. Sometimes you don't have the right people in the room. This may be the wrong resources. So you're trying to make a decision on some complex issue. Maybe it's a marketing issue. And you've got a bunch of research, but it's all just kind of your own research and you're not really comfortable with it yet. Well, it probably means you haven't got the one person or the resource in the room that can provide that comfort you need when you're trying to make a decision. So make sure you got the right people in the room. What often happens is you get to do the meeting over again. A decision might be made, and the real decision maker wasn't in the room. You're probably going to be revisiting that discussion. Usually a lack of participation is a result of a lack of preparation, but not always. Poor participation is not the responsibility of the leader or whoever is chairing the meeting. It's about each individual in the meeting itself. And remember when we were talking about one of the characteristics being an environment of open and honest communication? This is where it comes into play. So we've always got the people that tend to dominate the conversations. Well, maybe they're dominating the conversation because nobody else is talking. How do you draw out the quiet ones? You have to do that if you want to have an effective meeting. So part of that is managing it. But again, it's not the person that's running the meeting. It's not their responsibility. It's the responsibility of each individual that's in the room. Welcome to the cell phone age. Interruptions. And it might not just be cell phone. It might be, oh, I got to run out early because my son's hockey game is on and I got to make sure I get him there. So I got to skip out of the meeting early. Manage the interruptions. Make sure you give yourself the time to do what you need to do. There's never any hidden agendas. Not that anybody will admit to. This one's simple. Say what you mean what you say. I'm talking too long.
Sorry, if you have the signs up, I don't think you can see.
No, I'm just about done. When we're talking purpose, this one is key in that you need to have an objective. What's the purpose of the meeting? When you guys are coming to the meeting, what's the purpose? Everybody should know. It might be just to gather information. It might be to get an opinion. It might be to perform a task. It might be to make a decision. Know what it is. That one's pretty obvious. No agenda. Going to be hard to know if you're on track or not, making the meeting work the way it should. And usually you end up getting off subject if you don't have an agenda. Start on time. Be disciplined. And this one is one that kind of gets dismissed, the no record keeping. But I've often heard the comment, haven't we talked about this already? If a meeting is running longer than an hour, it's probably too long for most meetings. You're starting to lose interest, people fade. And this one is critical. You need to have a method to make decisions. Doesn't mean it has to be the same method for every decision, But you need to know what the method is that you're going to be employing if you need to make a decision. So if you're trying to do something strategic and all-encompassing for the family farm, odds are a dictatorship approach to decision-making isn't going to be the best approach. You're probably going to be looking for consensus. If you're trying to make a decision on a specific application or something you need to be doing in the field operations, who's in charge of field operations? You might seek input, but at the end of the day, it's probably that person with the responsibility making that decision. So know what the method is in terms of making a decision. So those are some of the things you need to do in terms of if you want to get people engaged. Put rules in place. Open and honest communication. Allow the time for processing, as I talked about. Don't allow one person to dominate. And everybody has a negative Nelly. Well, there might actually be some substance to what that person is saying. Probe deeper. Find out. Ask some questions. Sometimes it might just be a bad day. Other times, there might actually be some validity to their comments. Avoid meeting stew. Don't throw everything into one. Patrick Lencioni said, really, you need 4 different types of meetings. There they are. What's the plan for the day? Or what's the plan for tomorrow? 5-minute conversation. Don't even need to sit down. Probably don't need a pen and paper. What's the plan for the week? What do we got to get done? That one's probably more critical in slow times than it is when you guys are busy, because it keeps you on task. Monthly strategic. You need to stand back and look at the big picture. What are some of the bigger challenging issues we need to work on for the year? What have we identified that we need to be focusing on? Let's have a separate meeting for those and let's talk about them. Should be a lot of those happening as we come through the winter months, because typically we have a little more time to do that. And then the quarterly review. And quite honestly, it's not necessarily whether it's quarterly or not, but if you have a plan, if you're not looking in the mirror, how do you know if you're on track? So you need to look backwards in the mirror, but you also need to look forward. So closing thought. Remember this when you're employing what you do. It's as much about how you do things as it is what you're doing. And you'll be far more successful. Thank you.